The last paper in this session is by Professor Vojtech Vlada. His talk will be dedicated to Slovakia. Our speaker is a professor at the Comenius University in Bratislava, Faculty of Law, and Trnava University, Faculty of Theology. In his research, he deals with canon law, history of church law, state law and religion, Roman law, as well as classical philology. His main monographs are dedicated to the chosen institutions of Roman and canon law, as well as sources of law of the Catholic Church in their historical development. Professor Vlada, please take the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I really appreciate the honor to be here with you today. Well, as my colleagues said or pointed out, the matter of interest is that some states maybe are not quite concerned with mentioned problems. I mean the problem of using the religious symbols in the public sphere. And the example of this is also Slovak Republic, where almost any such conflicts appeared until now. Considering the history, the churches and religious societies, especially I mean the Catholic Church, played one of the most significant roles. Aforesaid maybe on the present demonstrated by the large number of people evolving to the religion or to the membership of one of the churches or religious societies. Namely, according to the last census of population and housing of 2011, the confession of certain religion declared at least 76% of population in the concrete. Although these statistics prove that majority of the population of Slovak Republic consider churches and religious societies to be the integral part of social structure and perceive them as important factor of identification of their own being. All the world was to accept the grasping of power by the representatives of communist regime that regarded them as ideological enemies, restricted their activities and social influence in every possible way, and put them under the governmental as well as economic surveillance and international isolation. Well, after the fall of the communism regime, the churches and religious societies managed to achieve the status completely comparable with other democratic states, and they also gained the guarantees of their external as well as internal autonomy. Religiousness remains until now really one of the most important factors influencing everyday social life. That's really the fact, and that's really typical for Slovakia. Considering the axiological and constitutional foundations of these topics, I mean, I have to say primarily the Constitution expressly guarantees the right of every individual to manifest his or her religion or faith, and of it could be also deduced the right to manifest religion or faith through religious symbols. Considering our situation, I mean the relationships between the churches and religious societies, any conflicts are actual and the relationships are more than excellent. For example, I may mention that the Secretary of Central Union of Jewish Communities here in Slovakia, reflecting our situation and the situation in other European countries, expressed that Slovakia is really paradise. So that's for the illustration maybe. Considering the model of relationships between the state and churches and religious society, I may say that new democratic regime chose alike the approach of perfect cooperation of state and churches and religious societies that is really typical for Slovakia, except for the communist regime, I mean. Considering the present times, present-day conception of Slovak state is secular, but the relationship of above standard collaboration of state and individual churches and religious societies is still in practice. Therefore, it is appropriate to speak on the cooperating model here in Slovakia. Although Slovak Republic doesn't bind to any religion officially, it is not neutral valuably, and in several sources of law, directly or indirectly appreciate the great importance of religion in the field of education and formation of human being. The principle of parity is applied as well. And we can maybe mention also this principle is modified a little bit through the guaranteed opportunity for the churches and religious society to achieve the public law status after meeting certain conditions. I refer especially to the registration, and on that basis, some experts speak maybe on two-step parity. After the registration, state formally recognizes a spiritually oriented institution, given church or religious society, with its own stabilized religious doctrine, functional organization, structure, and stable membership. For the purpose of better cooperation, the registered churches and religious societies made individual contracts with Slovak Republic, namely in the form of international law treaty with the Holy See, in the case of course, the Catholic Church, or internal agreement in case of the non-Catholic churches or religious societies. Let's take a look at the Constitution of Slovak Republic. It arranges freedom of thinking, conscience, and religion to the fundamental human rights pertaining to everyone, regardless of his or her nationality, race, color of skin, religion, political, and so on. Essentially, these rights enjoy the character of natural law, since they result from the essence of every individual as human being. Concerning the Constitution itself, we may mention especially the reference to the Cyril-Methodian spiritual heritage and historical legacy of Great Moravia. It is mentioned in the preamble, and it's really typical for Slovakia to refer to these things. Considering our topic, it is appropriate to look at the Article 24 of the Constitution that guarantees mentioned freedom of thinking, conscience, religion, belief, and faith. Section 1st of this article then constitutes, everyone has the right to manifest his thinking publicly, and then section 2 develops, everyone has a right to freely manifest his or her religion or faith, either by himself or herself, or with others, privately or publicly, through worship, religious activities, observing ceremonies, or participating in its education. Well, concerning the other sources of law, they are, of course, enacted to the Constitution, secundum and intra legem, and at the first place, we got to mention the law number 308 of 1991 on freedom of religious belief and status of churches and religious societies, consisting only of 25 paragraphs, and supplement containing the list of the churches and religious societies registered by the state. Well, I had to say, this source of law, as well as other sources of law, contain any provision that would be expressly treating on the using of religious symbols in the public sphere. It is also the same in case of basic treaty between the Holy See and the Slovak Republic, as well as agreement between Slovak Republic and registered churches and religious societies. Concerning the limits of using of religious symbols in Slovakia, as mentioned, none of the relevant sources of law expressly suppose anything like that. Rather, contrariwise, such procedure will be almost impossible, and with reference to the fact that almost all state symbols, I mean state coat of arms, state flag, as well as state seal, contain early Gothic double cross, that is, of course, associated with the Christian religion that is traditional for our country. On the other hand, we may mention maybe some little conflicts known to the public thanks to the media. With reference to our topic, the Ministry of Culture of Slovak Republic, representing the central body of state administration in the field of churches and religious societies, have to intervene sporadically, respectively knows about few of these cases. Within this context, we may note certain procedures of registration when it was necessary to settle up also with the expressions of religious intolerance, directed even against religious symbols of other churches and religious societies. Referring the concrete to the long-term endeavor of the Christian associations in Slovakia that applied for the registration thrice. The vituperation of the religious symbols in Slovakia is sporadically actual also on the part of certain performers, I mean some artists, you know. Also, we may mention the members of the various extremist movements that come into conflict with the provisions of criminal law on the ground of using, profaning, or directly destroying the religious symbols. Misuse of religious ideologies, including symbols, it is also typical, it is generally known for the rightist extremist groups, referring usually to the paganism or individual perception of Christianity. In addition to the Christian symbols, they often refer also to the Nordic mythology, I mean especially God Odin, as it's generally known. To the problems of religious symbols in the public sphere in Slovakia sometimes expresses also the Council for the Advertisement that consider their content with its own code. For example, in 1997, it responded to the complaint of the Catholics on the poster promoting the movie The People versus Larry Flint, profaning cross as Christian religious symbol. This motion was refused. The motion of 2011 was related to the complaint on the advertisement for the spray for men misusing religious symbol of angels. This council declared that symbol of angel is not only religious symbol, and the motion was refused. Also, the Council for Broadcasting and Retransmission sometimes deals with analogous motions that, for example, in 2013 didn't identify the objections of 3 subjects, claiming that in certain close to election of new pope, the religion was profaned or vituperated. Well, let's take a look at the system of legal protection. As pointed out, in Slovakia, any case didn't appear directly or indirectly concerning the problematic of using of religious symbols in the public sphere. Sometimes little misunderstandings were essentially to the full satisfaction of all involved, sought out through the out-of-court settlement, usually agreement. So the Slovak courts are eventually by no means burdened with religious cases, although sometimes such a case appear. Most frequently, they decided the cases related, for example, to the restitution of the church property that oblige persons didn't transfer or refuse to transfer to the petitioning church or religious society within the limit provided by law. Analogously, we may mention also a few cases of labor law character between clergymen, I mean ex-clergymen, and their employers, registered churches and religious societies. But local courts did not deal with any cases concerning neither the registration nor conflicts related to the activities of non-registered church or religious society. As a matter of interest, I may mention, for example, that a local court decided the case when the member of Greek Catholic Church applied to the state court to force the given church to erase the mark of the baptism by reason of being baptized as a child. Of course, the court denied such a motion, asserting that in this case the state may not interfere with the doctrine of individual church or religious society. Well, to the conclusion, here in Slovakia, really everyone has a right to manifest and confess his or her conviction, and the only limits that may be put into practice are on behalf of public security and protection of the rights of the others. As pointed out, the fundamental Christian symbols may be, after all, denoted to be the firm part of the Slovak national identity. As a concrete proof, we may note that, for example, the national symbol of double cross is really typical for Slovakia, as, for example, the Star of David for the state of Israel. Although sporadically such cases happen, until now, they were never submitted to the court, since the parties always managed to resolve them in a certain way. Well, that's all from me, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Vlada, for your presentation.